Hello, this is the Harvard Light. I'm Mary. I give a conservative perspective about the world around me. So, feedback is important. Feel free to reach out to me, and those links will be provided for you. So, some of the audio platforms that I'm on Spreaker, I'm on Spotify, Pandora, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, just to name a few. Okay, so this episode, I'm getting back into the aspects of American Lit. So now I'm going to cover the surface of more aspects of literature that more in the sense of the modern age here when we get into the aspects of getting to the industrialization age, the Gilded Age, getting out of the Gilded Age to industrial age, on to the 20th century and so. Now, in these times, it shaped a lot of perspective about American culture and subculture. Here we go. Okay, so here is an AI-generated response of American Lit from the 20th century. And then I'm going to give my thoughts after this. And with this. So, American literature in the 20th century saw significant developments and movements that shaped its unique character. Important movements in drama, poetry, fiction, and criticism took shape in the years before, during, and after World War I. With literary forms becoming extraordinarily varied and authors experimenting with radical technical experiments within it. Say that 10 times fast. So modernism, characterized by a concern with form and exploration of technique rather than content and narrative, emerged as a major trend. Notable writers of the early 20th century include James Joyce, T.S. Eliot, Ezra Pound, who were influenced by American literature and contributed to its development. So the period also saw the rise of influential American writers such as William Faulkner, John Steinbeck, and Ernest Hemingway, who explored themes of disillusionment and loss of their works. Additionally, the Beat movement led to poets like Allen Ginsberg, which challenged traditional poetic convictions and had a lasting impact on American poetry. Drama came to prominence for the first time in the United States in the early 20th century with playwrights like Eugene O'Neill, Tennessee Williams, and Arthur Miller, creating unique American plays. These playwrights drew inspiration from European theater, but crafted works that resonate deeply with American audiences. So in summary, 20th century American literature was marked by a rich, diverse style of themes and movements, with significant contributions from a wide array of influential authors and poets. Okay, so, hold on just a minute. Okay, so here's what I think here. In the 20th century, me reading and understanding and learning growing up in the 90s and then in the 2000s and so forth, and then hear about these writers, and then reading, their works, as I got older, I can understand why they had a lot of influential impact on culture. Specifically, when we get into how prevalent American writing was on people like James Joyce, T.S. Eliot, Ezra Pound. And if I'm not mistaken, James Joyce, these are mixtures of British, I think might Irish maybe, but particularly with British writers here. And so what does that in itself say? It says that if you can connect in a way which is very profound and which is relatable to people, it can transcend your own aspects of culture. And so, for instance, T.S. Eliot, with his poetry, you can see a lot of aspects of Edgar Allan Poe in it. And, believe it or not, Edgar Allan Poe was more than just doom and gloom, goth sort of horror. That was one aspect that he wrote about, but he specifically, part of his writing was centered around relationships and the reality of that, and the ins and outs, and trying to figure everything out. And with T.S. Eliot, is very, I think that from my point of view, it's apparent that influenced his writing a lot. Edgar Allan Poe influenced his writing a lot, in a way where he would talk about things. Excuse me, I'm sorry. I have my allergies. I'll be right back. In a way in which he would talk about things that was, he would break everything down, and he would just strip away from being overtly flowery, when talking about the aspects of love and belonging. He would just say, there's one poem that comes to mind where, for the essence of this, so, from this is how I interpreted this. So it's one of those things where just because you can feel something, understand something, doesn't necessarily mean that you constantly stay in that state of wanting or belonging. Essentially, love or interest breaking down, or changing your point of view about something where you don't feel the same anymore, or you might have empathy for something, but it's not as deeply impactful as someone else might want you to feel. And that's very elegant and very delicate to the situation of humanity and the aspects of emotions, and understanding and figuring out your own emotions. And I think that Edgar Allan Poe really got that well with talking about subjects of this nature. Okay, so here we go with William Faulkner, and then John Steinbeck and Ernest Hemingway, and then I'm gonna get into jeez. F. Scott Fitzgerald, people like that here. So, William Faulkner. He was really good at, I think, at breaking it down to where, hold on. I'm sorry about that. Bear with me, y'all. I didn't want to just not record just because of my allergies. All right, so William Faulkner was really good at the aspects of getting into the nitty-gritty of Southern life. Now, he even got into the aspects of getting the prose, or getting the grammar of the syntax, the grammar of the, and then breaking down and experimenting and re-establishing the aspects of how to write when you get into the associations with how people conversate. And so, when someone is talking to you and which was just, imagine you're reading something like that at its time, and then looking back and then reading this, other generations reading this, it's like, what the heck? This really something different. Now, when when it's explained, when you look at it, you're like, why are these sentences so long? Why is this? And then you start to, if you want to take that path, you look at it and from an academic point of view. So, and you start to realize that's how people talk. People don't just say short and concise things most of the time when they're trying to explain or talk or remember, with all of that comes with having a conversation with someone. It's all over the place. And then that's how his writing is here. And so, in the fact that he chose to center around the aspects of Southern life, again, is breaking down the aspects of what is expected, what is thought of a person from the South. And so, you start to, get into the unity and the sole purpose of why he's writing the way that he's writing and why he's presenting the characters in the way that he does. He wants to center around that we are more than the sum of our parts. We are more than the sums of where we come from. And so that, for instance, talking, conversating, and so forth is supposed to be, typically understood as an example of how Southern people are. They just, talk all day, have all this time to just sit on the porch and talk. When that's just not the case, But again, it's just, witty how he breaks all that stuff down to get to the point of the matter of that, about the human nature. And so when we get into Ernest Hemingway and we get into John Steinbeck specifically was centered around the aspects of the working man here. The aspects of, moving along and trying to collect and gather and make peace with the surroundings that you're dealt with, the hand that you're dealt with. And he did that really well. And Ernest Hemingway, how he would write, it was very panache and bravado. That there's sort of the aspects of the man's gentleman sort of type of mystique of writing, but at the same time it's very prolific into the aspects of writing about man versus nature, and to the alliterations that he would have, or the similes, metaphors that he would have. It was very relatable, and going back to Greek philosophy and the classical works of the Greeks and so forth, when you break all that stuff down. And I think that as Scott Fitzgerald had this same sort of mystique and appeal with his writing too. Particularly when you get into aspects of East of Eden, and then of course Great Gatsby. If you're in high school or so forth, if you're forced to read it, if you're not forced to read it, or if you saw the adaptations of The Great Gatsby, there's a lot of metaphorical reasons into where you really pay attention to it, and you can understand why his works were valuable for the time of the 20s, because he made a lot of commentary about the aspects of how people were living in the 20s and the access and the greed of the 20s and so forth. And hold on just a minute. Okay. All right. So beatnik stuff. I don't know. It's one of those things that, again, is presenting counterculture and stripping away from the aspects of conventional thought and so forth. And that's why I've said this before in a podcast. Well, that's specifically on Messages in a Bottle that I publish on Sunday, that I release on Sunday. So anyway, I think I think The Graduate is a really good example of what that point being that I'm trying to make with the beatnik movement here. So, in The Graduate, you have this character, Dustin. I'm trying to think about it. I think it's Dustin Hoffman here. Yeah. And his character is, he's young, he's drifting, he doesn't quite know what he wants to do in his life here. And so, it's all this whole thing where they present these things with culture within itself, the culture within language. Saying, I don't want to be a plastic, and what the hell does that mean? I don't want to be a plastic, which is that's very prevalent of having that kind of jargon, have that specific jargon in this movie. So, simply put, what it means is that him and his generation, they don't want to fall into being like their parents, being conventional. They think that it's more to life than getting a house, getting married, having a family, and that's to them, in their point of view, that's like a death sentence. And so it's much more to be a part worldly, to either whatever that means is whatever that means. Either to travel, either to not fit into conventional thinking, or so forth. And so all these things preoccupy his mind into the fact that he's kind of in a frozen state and he's just aimlessly wandering around. And so he meets this young girl, And he it's one of those weird things where, he notices her, but she's not enough for him at the time, so he treats her like crap, and then she's like, whatever. And she doesn't know what to do, and she represents the aspects of, she still wants that conventional way of thinking, but she understands the essence of the ever-changing world around her, being a modern woman, and she's, trying to figure out those worlds out for herself. She want to be of the age of free love, free thinking, free spirit, free whatever, or does she want to be a conventional woman and, be getting married, have children, and then have her life set? It's one of those things she's trying to figure out for herself too. And then come into play her mom, her mother. Her mother comes into the scene, and her mother has an affair with this young man, Dustin Hoffman. And it's like it's very shocking. How could what are you doing seducing a young man like that? And you're married, and it's gross, it's weird. But again, in itself, it's breaking down the aspects of her and herself too, trying to figure out her place, because she is supposed to be the one that's got it all figured out. She's supposed to be the one that's in a cup, the wraps around, and the thought process that her way of her generation is right with the way of thinking. And she's just as disillusioned as any young person is, and it breaks down the fabric and the social dynamic of everything. And then it comes to turn when her daughter finds out what she's done, and it's the young girl that Dustin Hoffman, was very aloof to. And so, to make a long story short here, I think that the beatnik movement here, especially when we get into these kind of poets and we get on the road, we get, into stories like this, essentially put here, is all about trying to figure out who you are in the grand scheme of things, and the ugliness and the brutality within that, and then the aspects of being young and making careless mistakes and doing all these things and thinking that FOMO, thinking if you don't do all this kind of crazy stuff, you're missing out, and then what is the aftermath of that? And a lot of controversy has came out, throughout the years about these people who have written specifically in the beatnik culture, when we have Kerouac and on the road about their, personal lives. And it's quite interesting too how that the, reality is merging with fiction and so forth here. And okay, so going on to Tennessee Williams, Arthur Miller, stuff like that. They really got, when we get plays, when we get the Crucible, and we get stuff like that. The Crucible thing is a really good example of, the nucleus of everything with the playwrights at that time here. So they were uniquely trying to do something that was experimental, I guess for its time. It's one of those things where you find out you think you're doing something different, but somebody's done it in some way before. So it's, it's one of those arguments where nothing is really original. It's just the way you present it that's different, I guess. So I think the Crucible is a really good example of that. It's, making commentary of the aspects of being blacklisted at the time, and then the McCarthy era here. and the aspects of, you know, of going on a bandwagon and being sensationalized by something that you don't understand, or the progress of how people are thinking that you don't understand, which relates to the Salem witch trials here, and having that same notion that it is no different, and how, you know, what they did was very, you know, unheard of to do, and very, you know, but at the same time, you know, when you look back at what they're doing, you know, if you have a sense of reason, you know, you say, well, you know, they were not evolved enough. They're very, very primitive, right? Like, in you know, sort of say, well, I guess they couldn't help it, you know, have that kind of point of view about it. But, you know, a play like The Crucible shocks you in the reality of the situation, that things like this are happening in your own time. And if you're not careful and you don't pay attention to history, and you don't pay attention to the aspects of the way people can influence, a way you can be persuaded by either, you know, governmental means, or you can be persuaded by other things in the media, it can twist your way of thinking to where you can be brainwashed into believing that it's normal to just outcast somebody without any sort of proof. All right, with this said, I'm going to give some more analysis, you know, and then wrap everything up. Well, more facts and then wrap everything up. Okay, so the 20th century in American literature. So, writing from 1914 to 1945, important movements in drama, poetry, fiction, and criticism took shape in the years before, as I was saying. Although drama had not yet been a major art form in the 19th century, no type of writing was more experimental than the new drama that arose in rebellion against the global commercial stage. In the early years of the 20th century, Americans traveling in Europe encountered a vital flourishment in theater. Returning home, some of them became active in finding the little theater movement throughout the country. Free from commercial limitations, playwrights experimented with dramatic forms and methods of production, and in time, producers, actors, and dramatists appeared who had been trained in college classrooms and community playhouses. So, here we go. Literary forms of the period were extraordinarily varied, and in drama, poetry, and fiction, leading authors to tend towards radical technical experiments. So, some little theater groups became commercial products. For example, the Washington Square Players, found in 1915, which became the Theater Guild's first production in 1990. So then, resulting drama was marketed by script of innovation, by new seriousness and maturity. So here we go. Eugene O'Neill, the most admired dramatist of the period, was a product of this movement. How? He worked with the Providence Players before his plays were commercially produced. His dramas were remarkable for their range. So Beyond the Horizon, for instance, which was first performed in 1920. Anna Christie, 1921. Desire Under the Elms, 24. The Iceman Cometh, 1946, were naturalistic works, while Emperor Jones, 20, and The Hairy Ape, 22, made use of expressionists. So these techniques developed in German drama in the period of 1914 and 24. He also imploded a stream of consciousness from the form of psychological monologue and strange interlude in 28, and produced a work that combined myth, family drama, and psychological analysis. in the morning becomes electrical in 1931. So again, with the aspects of this haunting psychological impression on people, and then the impression is with the Germans and with the scream and everything else, with everything being internalized of how your emotions affect your outward reality, So no other dramatist was generally praised as O'Neill, but many others wrote plays that reflect the growth of serious and varied drama, including Maxwell Anderson, whose verse and drama have dated badly, and Robert E. Sherwood, a Broadway professional who wrote both comedy, Reunion and Vienna in 1931, and tragedy, There Shall Be No Night in 1940. So Mark Connolly wrote touching fantasies in an African-American folk biblical play. So, for instance, The Green Pastures in 1930. Like O'Neill, Elmer Rice made use of both expressionistic techniques, for instance, The Adding Machine in 1923, and naturalism, Street Scene in 1929. So, we're getting with naturalism with the aspect of that literary sense that, everything is dog eat dog, even your good qualities is against you, and sorting all that out. Isaiah wrote powerful, well-crafted melodramas in the Children's Hour in 1934, and The Little Foxes in 1939. Radical theater experiment included the Mark Blisson's savagely sarcastic musical The Cradle Will Rock in 1937, and the work of Orson Welles and John Houseman for the government-sponsored Works Progress Administration, or the WPA Federal Theater Project. The premier radical theater of the decade was the group theater in 1931 through 41. Now I'm going to go on to poetry. Poetry ranged between traditional types of verse and experimental writing that departed radically from experiments with established forms of poetry of the 19th century. Two New England poets, Edwin Arlington Robinson and Robert Frost, were noted for their technical experimentation, and they both won critical and popular acclaim in this period. Robinson, whose first book appeared in 1896, did his best work in sonnets, ballad stanzas, and blank verse. In 1920, he won 3 Pulitzers for The Man Who Died Twice and Trestman. Like Robinson, Frost used traditional stanzas and blank verses in volumes such as A Boy's Will in 1913, his first book, and North of Boston in 1914, New Hampshire in 1923, and At Further Range in 1936, and Masquerade of Reason in 45. The best-known poet of his generation, Frost, like Robinson, saw and commented upon the tragic aspects of life in poems such as Design. And so Design, that poem is very unique. So, you get into the aspects of you start to, which is a good translation or a good relate to merging naturalism with humanity at the same time, okay? So this is what I mean by that. Okay. So you start from, you're solely seeing things from the human's point of view about the spider, okay? And then, they're describing everything. And so the spider is simply going about its life the way it knows. Takes its prey, eats, and then it's done. But from the humanity's point of view, it's like, this is evil. How can you just do this? How can you just take captive of another life and just eat it for yourself and just be done with it and just move on with your life. That's calculating, that's cruel. But in essence, isn't that cruel to, subject your what you think from a human point of view onto a insect or onto an animal, And now all these things it's radical because they twist within each other about not understanding the aspects of order and reason with how things work in nature, and that's something else. And it's well done. I really like that poem design. Okay, so directive and provide. So Frost memorably crafted the language of common speech into traditional poetic form with the effect of that. And then when we get on to the aspects of what I was talking about with the Harlem Renaissance, with prolific writers and free verse writers and so forth, when we get into Langston Hughes, we get all to people like this. And I'm just going to wrap up and talk about my thoughts and end on my thoughts, okay? So, drama, especially playwrights and emerging with the ever-changing things that were going on at that and the 20th century, the theater, going on to cinema and then going back with the literary works. I think it merged a lot of things together to where people could concretely. There was a concrete example in the theater of how culture and the written word can shape the consciousness of what people think about, people are feeling in their culture, and then shape the aspects of art and the reality of art and how people, associate everything with certain works. All right, so I'd like to know what you all think about the aspects of American literature, specifically in the 20th century, and how it did and has shaped culture. Feel free to reach out to me. This reaches the end of the Harboring Light. Tune in, turn up, and absolutely take care. Bye-bye for now.